You follow what Congress does, you follow what the president does, you also got to follow what the Supreme Court does as well. Now, the Supreme Court issued several decisions. It's June. So June is that time of year where our republic is either strengthened or weakened by actions of the Supreme Court. Thankfully, we've had the republic largely strengthened by actions of the Supreme Court due to the fact that there are conservative jurists that have been appointed over the years by presidents, including the current president, President Trump, that keep on affirming the rule of law, protecting our republic from intervention and hijacking of our rights of self-government from rogue activist judges, and who seemingly try to fairly apply the law. Now, in many cases, you may not know this in June, there are many cases that are 9-0, where the liberals and conservatives all agree this is what the law is, this is what the Constitution requires, as best as we're able to tell. But there are several cases, and I've gone through them with you already, where the justices diverge, generally speaking, by ideology. That's not always the case. But more or less, you have these 6-3 cases where the conservatives are in the majority of 6 and the liberals are in the minority of 3. And we had 3 or 4 of those, I think 4 of those cases, more or less, maybe just 3, because one case had a conservative in the minority. I'm not going to go through the cases in exacting detail with you, but I want to give you enough detail so you know what they're about. Because if you listen to liberal media, they won't tell you what they're really about. They characterize them in a way to make it seem like the conservatives are doing something wrong. There were 2 cases that upheld, and this is important, because we've had, I don't know, maybe you've missed it. I doubt you have, because the media and much of D.C. likes to pretend it hasn't happened. Thankfully, President Trump and some of his appointees haven't forgotten. We've had an invasion of the United States over the last several years by illegal aliens. And President Trump and his team have been trying to reverse the invasion, and they've been thwarted time after time by outrageous acts of defiance by judicial activist judges. And thankfully, the Supreme Court has issued at least 2 decisions that will allow President Trump to reverse the invasion in a more significant way. One, just in case he needs to take additional steps, and the other is an immediate issue that he needs to address and he's trying to address. The immediate issue is something called temporary protected status. Temporary protected status was a law passed, I think it was around 1990 or so, that allowed the presidents and the Secretary of Homeland Security, or the responsible official at the time, I don't think we had Homeland Security at the time, to make a determination about a country and provide temporary protected status to individuals from that country to remain here. And the whole point of it is it's temporary. And once he or she makes the determination that the conditions in the country don't mandate or warrant allowing people to reside here in the United States, they have to go home or to a third country. They no longer have lawful presence, or will no longer have lawful presence once the TPS structure is eliminated, or once the TPS determination is undone. And some countries have had TPS determinations that have gone on and on and on for decades. So as Justice Alito noted in his majority opinion, temporary protected status has resulted sometimes in the status continuing for decades. Let's go to, I'll show you the section of his opinion where he describes this. Although designed to afford temporary relief, TPS designations in practice have often lasted for decades. For example, the Secretary designated Somalia in 1991, and that designation remains in effect 35 years later. 3 other countries retain designations that are more than 25 years old. Although he notes in a footnote, which I think is interesting, that there are three countries where there was a brief TPS designation or determination. In Lebanon, terminated 2 years after initial designation. Rwanda, terminated 3 years after initial designation. And Montserrat, terminated less than 8 years after initial designation. I got to confess, I thought Montserrat was a city, not a country. So I guess I don't know everything, right? And so the big fight is, after President Trump made it clear he generally opposes this scheme and scam that is just a backdoor amnesty for hundreds of thousands of, in the case before the court, Haitians and Syrians, he said no more. And the secretary said there's no more reason to allow these designations to continue. And the big dispute is whether or not the court can second guess the determination to either institute or end temporary protection designation for a country that allows, again, its residents, its citizens to reside here in the United States without being deported. And the president said no to Haiti, no to Syria, and he's likely to say no to any other temporary protected status designation that gets renewed in his term. So they're up for renewal every 18 months. So you know what the left did. They went and sued. And you know what happened with leftist anti-Trump judges. They immediately said, oh, no, you can't do this. Even though the statute that defines temporary protected status and how it's designated in a country, for a country by an executive branch official, it's immune from being reviewed by the judiciary. Congress said the judiciary can't review the determination. And somehow these courts said, well, that doesn't matter. And here the Supreme Court said it does matter and you're not allowed to do it. And the only other way they could have possibly gotten around it, according to one theory, is that the president did it based on improper purposes. He was being racist and attacking Haiti as a terrible country. He used much more vituperative language than I am. And just generally attacking these countries as you know what whole countries, right? And they said, well, that's racist, and therefore you can't change temporary protected status or end it for Haitians and Syrians as a result. And the Supreme Court said, well, that's ridiculous. First of all, his statements were not, quote, racist in the way you suggest they were. He generally opposes the whole process. So there's no judicial determination, and the majority found that there's no constitutional lapse that would allow anyone who's affected by this decision to challenge the president or to challenge the determination. So a really simple case. But it could result in hundreds of thousands of people having to leave the country, which is what the law requires. I'm old-fashioned when it comes to the immigration problem. It's like we don't need reform, we just need to enforce the law as written. And the law as written affords the president unreviewable authority to determine temporary protected status for foreigners here in the United States based on the conditions in their home country. And the left says the law doesn't matter. And Justice Alito said it does matter. And in fact, Justice Thomas said, not only is it unreviewable, but just because you might think Trump is racist or it's unfairly determined because someone doesn't like the country, Justice Thomas says, well, that's too bad because it's unreviewable and in the sense that, the idea that because you're from Haiti or Syria, that you can raise a claim of discrimination based on national origin in the president's determination whether to let you in or out of the country, it's absurd. The whole world can't file a civil rights lawsuit against the president. And that's what the left wants to do, because that's their way of destroying any border security. So Justice Thomas's decision is well worth reading. And I encourage you to read the decision that I'm talking about here and the other ones I'll talk about, because they are accessible to the layman. I'm reading them. I'm a layman. I understand them. Some of them are a little bit thick sometimes legally, but I encourage you to read them. And you'll just see not only how sensible the majority opinions are, they're now being excoriated by the communists who seemingly are controlling our media these days, but how extreme the dissents are who are put on the court to uphold the rule of law, but seem to let their politics get in the way of upholding the rule of law. And plus you can read really based decisions, as some like to say, from Justice Thomas, who says, yeah, I agree with the majority, but I would go further. And so read the decisions. We'll post links to them below for you. Another important Supreme Court decision on immigration was, it's another seemingly simple one. So the left got angry that temporary protected status was deemed to be, quote, temporary by the Supreme Court. And the left is also upset that in this other decision, that the Supreme Court determined that when the law says you can get asylum or make a claim for asylum if you arrive in the United States, that doesn't mean you can claim asylum if you arrive in Mexico. See, this is, I mean, it's one thing to be fighting about these core constitutional issues that we all know about, like we'll talk about the Second Amendment later. But here we're doing the legal equivalent of arguing about whether the sky is blue or not. And the left has decided the sky is not blue, and the Supreme Court has to waste time, resources, and in the meantime, the rule of law is undermined by judges who try to interfere with the administration of the executive branch under the president's constitutional authorities over whether the sky is blue or not. So our asylum laws require the government to consider claims of asylum of anyone who's in the United States. So what Trump had done, he's not doing it now, but he wants to be able to do it in the future if the situation warrants, is that he's prevented people in Mexico from entering the United States in order to make asylum claims. And the left said, no, 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 no. You can't do that. They're in the United States for purposes of law, even though they're in Mexico. And again, Justice Alito and 6 justices of the Supreme Court said that is the most absurd thing we've ever heard. And I'll read you the first few lines of Justice Alito's majority opinion. And I really can't improve upon it beyond this. I encourage you to read the whole thing. This case presents a straightforward question whether an alien who seeks to enter the United States from Mexico arrives in the United States when he or she is still in Mexico. In the decision below, which was the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, that's the court below the Supreme Court, the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit answered, yes, that is wrong. In ordinary speech, no one would say that a person arrives in a place, for example, a house, a city, or a country, before the person enters that place. The context in which the phrase arrives in the United States is used in the immigration statute at issue here supports an ordinary meaning reading. So does the presumption against extraterritoriality. We therefore reverse. I mean, I hate to use the analogy, but we've all seen movies, right, where, the person's got to get asylum, but he has to get into the embassy, and the bad guys try to keep them from getting into the embassy. That's the common sense understanding of what being in a country or in a place where the country controls, in the case of a of an embassy means. So the left would have you believe as long as you're in Mexico, you can apply for asylum in the United States. And so you can read the decision, and Justice Alito explains the definition of in, and the dissenters say in doesn't mean what everyone thinks it means, and you can decide who's right. But I mean, my gosh. So it was a big deal in the first Trump administration because he was trying to end the crisis on the border because people were overwhelming the border, and the thinking of the government at the time was we're just going to let everyone in if they want to seek asylum. And Trump said, no, we're going to extend the border protection and prevent people from crossing the border. And yes, some can come in to get asylum or make an asylum claim, but we're going to do it in a regular, orderly, metered fashion. So thankfully, President Trump has essentially closed the border, so we're not facing that crisis, but he may need to have it available to him again in terms of preventing people from crossing the border and overwhelming and breaking our asylum system, which is already broken in many ways, but that's another matter. So a great common sense decision again from the Supreme Court. So, but a big victory for President Trump, because you would think, based on all these court decisions below, whether it be on temporary protected status or the asylum claims, that he's the devil incarnate for enforcing immigration law as written. And there's no way under law he should be able to do it. And they used smears against him, suggested he was being lawless and outrageous, when in fact all he was doing was enforcing the laws as written. And the Supreme Court affirmed President Trump's approach on, again, just enforcing the plain language of immigration law to protect our country and to reverse the Biden invasion. Another big case is this Hawaii case where, in response to various Supreme Court rulings affirming Second Amendment rights to citizens, Hawaii passed two laws that I think are terrible, a series of laws, most of which I think are terrible in terms of Second Amendment rights. But most specifically, that prevented someone, Hawaii didn't really want you to have any arms. They didn't want you to have a concealed or the ability to carry a weapon. I think for years they, according to the court, Hawaii issued firearm carry license only in exceptional cases. Indeed, it appears from the year 2000 to 2018, only 4 such licenses were issued. Well, the Supreme Court said the Second Amendment applies at the federal level, and the states need to follow it as well and respect the Second Amendment rights of citizens. And it's not just the Second Amendment, by the way, it's the 14th Amendment, too, that protects your Second Amendment rights. So these are 2 core civil rights sections of our Constitution that are being enforced by the Supreme Court and applied against left-wing states who want to disarm the population and hate the civil rights, the Second and 14th Amendment civil rights of citizens. And what Hawaii did after those Supreme Court decisions validating and vindicating the Second Amendment rights of citizens, they rewrote their laws to prevent anyone from being able to carry a weapon onto private property without prior and express permission. Now, obviously, a private property owner can say, I don't want weapons here. And, they have a right to make you keep your gun aside or disarm before you enter a supermarket or somewhere else. But the idea that the state could essentially require permission is at odds with our history. No laws regulating firearms ever went that far, as this decision highlights. The only laws similar that the defenders could find were essentially two sets of laws. There were laws in the 19th century, maybe even the 18th century, that prohibited people from going onto other people's enclosures or properties and hunting. So they were essentially anti-poaching laws. You can't carry guns and hunt. So the purpose of the law was to prevent illegal hunting and destructive hunting on someone else's private property. It wasn't a broad law to prevent people from carrying guns to and fro. The other set of laws that Hawaii and the left has embraced were laws designed to keep blacks from owning guns in the days after the Civil War. Yes, believe it or not, that's what they were telling the Supreme Court justified Hawaii's decision to prevent essentially anyone from, practically speaking, being able to carry a firearm around. And Justice Alito and 6 of the justices said that's ridiculous. There was no similar law during the time the Second Amendment was deemed to have protected the rights of citizens to keep and bear arms that would have prevented them from basically walking around with guns, bearing them onto other people's property. Again, it doesn't prevent you from saying, I don't want guns on my property. But Hawaii thought they were going to do this one neat trick, right? Hawaii and New York and a few other states. Oh no, you now need permission to go on to someone's property if you're armed. And Alito said, no, that's not the law. You know, and he described a case of a woman. He did a hypothetical case. Let's say a woman is afraid of her boyfriend and she buys a gun. She goes to the gas station, or she goes to the supermarket, she goes to work, and none of those places have explicit permission to bring a gun onto the premises. And she has to disarm herself repeatedly through the day, despite being concerned about her personal safety. It effectively steals her liberty in terms of being able to defend herself with this obviously broad law to prevent citizens, in a way never done before in American history, from exercising their Second Amendment rights. So this is a great decision for the rule of law, the Constitution, and your civil rights. I encourage you to read it. The fourth decision is a little less interesting, but interesting nevertheless. This is a decision concerning Roundup. You may have seen commercials by the plaintiff lawyers on television soliciting clients for Roundup. Roundup is a pesticide that the plaintiff lawyers suggest is dangerous because of a particular chemical in it. I'm not going to tell you what the chemical is. I'm not going to get into the details there. And essentially, they've decided the way. So Roundup is allowed to be sold. Okay, the EPA under federal law has examined the pesticide, found it to be safe and suitable for commercial use and sale. And what the plaintiffs' lawyers decided, well, we'll just work with states and say that they're not giving enough warning to people on the allegedly cancer-causing chemical in them under state law. And Roundup said, and Monsanto or Bayer, the companies behind Roundup, said, we can't do that. Federal law doesn't allow us to put these extra labels on that A, may not be valid, and B, only the feds can agree to. So we're between a rock and a hard place, because you're asking us to add labels that the federal government doesn't allow. And what's happening is that these cases have been proceeding in state courts, I think by the hundreds, and could destroy the company. And the Supreme Court looked at the decision, looked at what's going on here, and they said, look, the EPA has this very stringent law or a program for pesticides. The federal government designates the EPA as the judge of what goes on these pesticide labels, and that's good enough. And states that add extra requirements are preempted from doing so. So if the plaintiff lawyers want to go in with silly science, in my view, and try to extract giant jury verdicts or settlements from the makers of pesticides, they're going to have to do it based on not a fanciful state law that requires something that federal law doesn't require. The left is upset because the plaintiffs' lawyers give money to, or big funders of leftist candidates in the states and at the national level. So they're all angry about it. And I encourage you to read the decision, namely because I think you should read Justice Thomas's concurring opinion that says that the law creating the EPA ability by Congress to regulate pesticides is beyond the powers of Congress. So I encourage you to read his base decision, which I largely agree with as well. So some good news out of the Supreme Court. We're hoping for better news, or even better news, next week. So I wanted to spend some time on this because no one else is going to tell you about these cases, or at least the way I do, for better or for worse, right? And again, you can read the cases below, and I encourage you to read all Supreme Court cases as they're issued, even the ones that seemingly are boring. They are usually very educational in terms of the rule of law and our Constitution. Our Constitution is what protects our liberties in large measure. And so, you follow what Congress does, you follow what the president does, you also got to follow what the Supreme Court does as well, because that's the way the Constitution set up our governance. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.